Good morning again, everybody. How are you today? It's me again, Mrs. Carlson, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about going to the ocean and the seaside. There were some things that I didn't get a chance to show you last time we were together, so I thought I would kind of bring them out now, and then I'll read you a story. One of the things that I think is so cool that you can find on the seashore, if you're playing in the sand, would be a sand dollar that looks like this. This is a little sand dollar, and this is a bigger one that's kind of puffy, and they're so fun. You can see there's an animal. When they're alive, their mouth is in the middle on the bottom, and you find them on the sand on the bottom of the ocean. Another thing I'd like to show you that's kind of like that is a starfish. This is a starfish. It's a little one, and this is a bigger starfish. This one has started to break, so I have to be so careful with it. But they crawl around on the bottom of the ocean also, or they cling to the rocks sometimes on the very edge of the ocean where the waves splash over them. Their mouth is on the bottom in the middle. So that's a starfish. Sometimes when you're in a shallow part on the edge of the ocean and you want to look down into the ocean and see what's living down there on the rocks and in the seaweed, you can wear a mask and use a snorkel like this. And you look down into the water and float on the top of the water, and you're able to watch what's going on. It's pretty exciting. So today, I'd like to talk about how fish are born. They're not born alive like a puppy or a kitty. They're hatched from an egg, but it's not an egg that looks like a chicken egg with a hard shell on the outside. It's a little tiny egg that's kind of like Jello or maybe a little bit like jam in a jar. It's soft and squishy, and the fish grows inside of it. And then when it's time, when they've gotten big enough, they hatch out of the egg and swim away. So I have a story today about a seahorse. Now, a seahorse is kind of like a fish. It lives in the water. It looks like this, though, and he hangs on to branches of seaweed or little tiny rock pieces and stuff with his tail. But he does look a little like a horse with his mouth and his head, doesn't he? But they too are hatched from an egg. And this is all about who lays those eggs, and who takes care of those eggs before they're hatched. So I hope you can enjoy this story. Mr. and Mrs. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea. Mrs. Seahorse began to wiggle and twist this way and that. "It's time for me to lay my eggs," she said. "Can I help?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Oh, yes, thank you," said Mrs. Seahorse, and she laid her eggs into a pouch, like a pocket, on Mr. Seahorse's belly. "I'll take good care of the eggs," said Mr. Seahorse. "I promise." As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a group of trumpet fish hidden in the patch of reeds. That's called camouflage, when you hide somewhere and you kind of match the place that you're hiding. So let's see if we can see the trumpet fish. There they are. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Stickleback?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Delighted," replied Mr. Stickleback. "I just built a nest, and right away Mrs. Stickleback laid her eggs in it. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch." "Keep up the good work," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a lionfish hidden behind a coral reef. Shall we see if we can find the lionfish? Wonder if he looks like a lion. Whoa, there he is. He does look a little like a lion with all that fur around the lion's face. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Tilapia?" asked Mr. Seahorse. Mr. Tilapia couldn't answer. His mouth was full of eggs. I know, said Mr. Seahorse. "Mrs. Tilapia laid her eggs, and now you are taking good care of them until they hatch." Mr. Tilapia nodded his head. "You must be very happy," said Mr. Seahorse, and he swam on his way. Look at all those eggs in his mouth. The fish don't lay just one egg at a time. They lay a lot of eggs at a time. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by several leaf fish hidden among the seaweed. They must look a little like leaves, and they're hiding in there. Let's see if we can find them. Sure enough, they're kind of the color of leaves, aren't they? So they match the seaweed. They can hide. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Curtis?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Perfectly fine," replied Mr. Curtis. "Mrs. Curtis laid her eggs, and I have stuck them on my back. Now I am taking good care of them until they hatch." "You're doing a good job," said Mr. Seahorse, and he swam on his way. He's upside down, isn't he? Oh my, look at that. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed by a stone fish hidden behind a rock. Let's see if he's there. There he is, and he does look a little like a rock, doesn't he? Yeah. Oops. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Pipe?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Couldn't be better," replied Mr. Pipe. "Mrs. Pipe laid her eggs along my belly." Look at that. "Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch. You should feel proud of yourself," said Mr. Seahorse, and he swam on his way. He does look like a long, skinny pipe, doesn't he? But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "And how are you, Mr. Bullhead?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Tip-top," replied Mr. Bullhead. "Mrs. Bullhead laid her eggs, and the eggs hatched, and now I am babysitting." "You're doing a fine job," said Mr. Seahorse, and he swam on his way. Look how many babies there are. The time had come for the seahorse babies to be born. Mr. Seahorse wiggled and twisted this way and that way. At last the babies tumbled from Mr. Seahorse's pouch and swam away. One baby turned around and tried to come back into the pouch. "Oh no," said Mr. Seahorse. "I do love you, but now you are ready to be on your own." And off they went. Kind of interesting, isn't it, how all of these babies are born and hatched. Well, that was a fun story, and I hope that I get to see you again sometime this week. Enjoy your day today. Bye.